EMP is a loony idea. Once an enemy uses a nuclear weapon, for any reason, it crosses the nuclear threshold and invites a nuclear response. U.S. military commanders would not say, well, it was only an airburst. We should just respond in kind. They would answer with an overwhelming, devastating nuclear counterattack. And our nuclear weapons and command and control are designed to operate in a nuclear war environment, not just some puny EMP blast. If a war were to break out on the Korean peninsula over Pyongyang's development of long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles ICBMs and its thermonuclear weapons development efforts, the resulting conflict would be catastrophic even if it remained purely conventional. Worse still would be if nuclear weapons were used, which could ultimately escalate into Armageddon. Recommended. This video shows what happens if Washington, D.C. is attacked with nuclear weapons. While the devastation that nuclear weapons can rout onto cities and other population centers is obvious, the use of tactical nuclear weapons is often overlooked. In the case of Pyongyang using tactical nuclear weapons to defeat a US-led military intervention, American and Allied forces might suffer more damage than many might expect, particularly from the effects of electromagnetic pulses EMPs generated by such weapons. EMPs can do serious damage of electrical systems that are not specifically hardened to withstand such events. Indeed, U.S. forces are particularly vulnerable due to America's reliance on networks and advanced sensor system, many of which were developed after the end of the Cold War. Recommended. 8 million people could die in a war with North Korea. This first appeared in early September. Defense analysts and military officials are reluctant to comment openly about the seriousness of the problem due to the level of classification, but they acknowledge that only some U.S. and Allied hardware is protected from the effects of an EMP blast. Recommended. Why North Korea is destined to test more ICBMs and nuclear weapons. Some of it is, and some of it is not. Very specific to particular systems. Retired Air Force Lt. Gen. David Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute and former Service Intelligence Chief, told the National Interest. It would be an additional challenge to overcome. EMP hardening is very expensive, and in the world of the last 25 years of putting reducing costs as a priority over spectrum operational capability, it has not been a high priority. Brian Clark, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, was more direct. Most of our systems are not hardened against EMP. Some older analog or Cold War-era systems are. Clark told the National Interest. It is unclear whether a high atmospheric nuclear explosion would cause a significant EMP effect at lower altitudes and whether North Korea could execute such an attack without also affecting their own capabilities. Mark Gunzinger, an air power analyst at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments and a former Boeing B-52 strategic bomber pilot, told the National Interest that the Pentagon didn't expect such asymmetric threats but needs funding to address the challenge. Over the last decade, DoD Department of Defense has expressed its growing concern with hybrid threats posed by potential aggressors with a mix of conventional, unconventional, and asymmetric capabilities including WMD weapons of mass destruction, Gunzinger said. This will require funding to upgrade DoD's forces and weapon systems, including capabilities that can operate in WMD environments. On the specific issue of North Korea, Gunzinger said that an EMP would impact Pyongyang's force too, but conceded that U.S. forces are probably more vulnerable to such effects. It is likely that NOKO's use of a relatively unsophisticated EMP weapon over the Korean peninsula would affect their own forces and possibly their battle space command and control infrastructure. Gunzinger said. Asked directly if U.S. forces, which rely heavily on networks and advanced sensors, are likely to suffer more, Gunzinger said that was a distinct possibility. Quite possibly, yes. Just didn't want to get into it too deeply. Gunzinger said. It could have a crippling effect on military systems and networks that aren't appropriately hardened. Let's not forget the impact it could have on our allies. However, even if the North Koreans did not resort to using nuclear weapons to target cities and population centers, targeting only Allied military forces, or using an EMP blast, it is likely that the U.S. would resort to a nuclear counterstrike. If someone had a super powerful EMP that fried the North American power grid, do you imagine that the president would just shrug and say, "Nothing we can do about that"? Joshua H. Pollack, editor of the Non-Proliferation Review and a senior research associate at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, told the National Interest. Pages.